off to the races. Oh yeah, I'm painted up today. I went for it. Anywho, how you guys doing? It's another Heidegger read with me. My slideshow. When I was setting up a different live stream, I kind of screwed that up. So I don't know if I completely lost the playlist, but I'm gonna have to figure out what I did. Oh well. But anyway, guys, I hope you guys really enjoyed my rundown on the Loki series, which involves elements of Heidegger as I understand it at this point in the reading, and my comprehension of German and Greek, which is poor. But that's okay. Because context tends to bring meaning into the fold. Here we are at 43. We're going to read for a while. We'll see what's up. It's 2:15. I ain't going nowhere. How's the chat room doing? What chat room? Nobody chats. No, I'm kidding. Quite a few of you were chatting. Granted, that was when Slick was here, right? So it's all good. Anywho. 43. Dasein, worldhood, and reality. The question of the meaning of being becomes possible at all only if there is something like an understanding of being. Understanding of being belongs to the kind of being which the entity called Dasein possesses. The more appropriately and primordially we have succeeded in explicating this entity, the surer we are to attain our goal in the further course of working out the problem of fundamental ontology. In our pursuit of the tasks of a preparatory, existential, analytic of Dasein, there emerge an interpretation. Hold on a second. I thought I saw something shift in my screen. Is everything all right? This is going. Okay, I don't know what that was, but we're okay. Good. I want to have this. Hold on a second. Just trying to organize this messy desktop. Okay, there we go. In our pursuit of the task of preparatory existential analytics of Dasein, there emerged interpretation of understanding, meaning, and interpretation. Our analysis of Dasein's disclosedness showed further that, with this disclosedness, Dasein, in its basic state of being in the world, has been revealed equiprimordially with regard to the world, being in and the self. Furthermore, in the factical disclosedness of the world, entities within the world are discovered too. This implies that the being of these entities is always understood in a certain manner, even if it is not conceived in a way which is appropriately ontological. To be sure, the pre-ontological understanding of being embraces all entities which are essentially disclosed in Dasein. But the understanding of being has not yet articulated itself in a way which corresponds to the various modes of being. At the same time, our interpretation of understanding has shown that, in accordance with its falling kind of being, it has proximately and for the most part diverted itself, sich verlegt, into an understanding of the world, even where the issue is not only one of ontical experience, but also one of ontological understanding. The interpretation of being takes its orientation in the first instance from the being of entities within the world. Within the world is hyphenated, and if I remember prior annotations, that means that there's a particular word in German that has been that encompasses within the world as a word, or there's a word for within the world, or a hyphenated word in words in German that mean within the world is also a thing that could be happening, because the only reason with a translated text you're getting hyphens is that there's a German hyphenation, or that there's no word in English for this one word, and thus they hyphenate three words to express the meaning of one word. Okay, where were we? Shoot. Right, here we are, in the world. Even there's an experience, but also an ontological understanding, interpretation. Shoot. Within the world, thank you. Thereby the being of what is proximally ready to hand gets passed over, and entities are first conceived as a context of things, res, which are present at hand. Being acquires the meaning of reality. Substantially becomes the basic characteristic of being, corresponding to this way in which the understanding of being has been diverted. Even the ontological understanding of Dasein moves into the horizon of this conception of being. Like any other entity, Dasein too is present at hand as real. In this way, being in general acquires the meaning of reality. Accordingly, the concept of reality has a peculiar priority in the ontological problematic. By this priority, the route to a genuine existential analytic of Dasein gets diverted, and so too does our very view of the being of what is proximally ready to hand within the world. It finally forces the general problematic of being into a direction that lies off the course. The other modes of being become defined negatively and privatively with regard to reality. Thus, not only the analytic of Dasein, but the working out of the question of the meaning of being in general must be turned away from one-sided orientation with regard to being in the sense of reality. We must demonstrate that reality is not only one kind of being among others, but that ontologically it has a definite connection in its foundation with Dasein, the world and readiness to hand. To demonstrate this, we must discuss in principle the problem of reality, its conditions, and its limits. Under the heading, Problem of Reality, various questions are clustered. Whether any entities which supposedly transcend our consciousness are at all. 2. Whether this reality of external world can be adequately proved. 3. How far this entity, if it is real, is to be known in its being in itself. 4. What the meaning of this entity, reality, signifies in general. The following discussion of the problem of reality will treat three topics with regard to the question of fundamental ontology. A. Reality is a problem of being and whether the external world can be proved. B. Reality as an ontological problem. C. Reality and care. See, now we're talking about the scrutiny of the world at large, the world we take for granted, or even just the world in front of our face, right? The various different Daseins or degrees of Daseins or perceptions of Daseins with the whole question. Because this is important, because when your world can and does conflict with the world at large, it's the presumption that your world is wrong, even though your world has served you up until this point and may still serve you after this point if you choose to hold that world after this point where your world is put into inferiority. It's a question of, has your world been properly proven wrong? And this is when people can't work with that. This is when you see them regress into a loop where they're stuck in the same naive modalities from before the event, where they fail to lose the lesson and then they go back into the inferior standard of trust. I think you kind of understand the implication I'm getting at here, right? So, A, reality is a problem of being and whether the external world can be proved. Of these questions about reality, the one which comes first in order is the ontological question of what reality signifies in general. But as long as a pure, ontological, problematic, and methodology was lacking this question, if it was explicitly formulated at all, was necessarily confounded with a discussion of the problem of the external world. For the analysis of reality is possible only on the basis of our having appropriate access to the real, but it has long been held that the way to grasp the real is by that kind of knowing which is characterized by beholding, das Answend erkennen. Such knowing is as a way in which the soul or consciousness behaves, insofar as reality has the character of something independent, and in itself the question of the meaning of reality becomes linked with that of whether the real can be independent of consciousness, or whether there can be a transcendence of consciousness into the sphere of the real. The possibility of an adequate consciousness into the sphere of the real, the possibility of an adequate ontological and analytic analysis of reality depends on how far that of which the real is to be thus independent, how far that which is to be transcended. And we have our annotation. What does it say here? Nothing I have to read. Okay. Has itself been clarified with regards to its being. Only thus can even the kind of being which belongs to transcendence be ontologically grasped. And finally, we must make sure what kind of primary access we have to the real by deciding the question of whether knowing can take over this function at all. Though these investigations, which take precedence over any possible ontological question about reality, have been carried out in the foregoing existential analytic. According to the analytic, knowing is a founded mode of access to the real. The real is essentially accessible only as entities within the world. All access to such entities is founded ontologically upon the basic state of Dasein, being in the world, and this in turn has care as its even more primordial state of being, ahead of itself, being already in a world as being alongside entities within the world. The question of whether there is a world at all and whether its being can be proved makes no sense if it is raised by Dasein as being in the world, and who else would raise it? Furthermore, it is encumbered with a double signification. The world as the wherein, das Worden, or being in, and the world as entities within the world, that in which das Wobe. One is concernfully absorbed, either have been confused or are not distinguished at all, but the world is disclosed essentially along with the being of Dasein. With the disclosedness of the world has in each case been discovered too. Of course, entities within the world, in the sense of the real, as merely present at hand, are the very things that can remain concealed, but even the real can be discovered only on the basis of a world which has already been disclosed, and only in this basis can anything real still remain hidden. the question of the reality of the external world gets raised without any previous clarification of the phenomenon of the world as such. Factically, the problem of the external world is constantly oriented with regard to entities within the world, things and objects. So these discussions drift along into a problematic which it is almost impossible to disentangle ontologically. Kant's refutation of idealism shows how intricate these questions are and how what one wants to prove gets muddled with what one does prove and with the means whereby the proof is carried out. Kant calls it a scandal of philosophy and of human reason in general, that there is still no cogent proof for the Dasein of things outside of us, which will do away with any skepticism. He proposes such a proof himself, and indeed he does so to provide grounds for his theorem that the mere consciousness of my own Dasein, a consciousness which, however, is empirical in character, proves the Dasein of objects in the space outside of me. You're kind of talking about this whole idea of your struggle to acknowledge Dasein when it is hard to look at your personal Dasein in the mirror because you're already kind of in the reflection of it. As opposed to the Dasein in the world, which, can only show you your Dasein in contrast. It shows your Dasein by showing you everything about itself that you don't acknowledge. And forcing you to acknowledge it. And forcing you to change it. By the merit of understanding that your Dasein has to work in cooperation with other peoples out there. Right? And things get existential on every possible level once you start bringing in the application of other persons within your influence, because you are also within their influence. And thus, your Daseins have to have an accord. Otherwise, one will have to, there's going to be tension between the two, and tension needs to be resolved in certain ways. Okay. We must, in the first instance, note explicitly that Kant uses the term Dasein to designate that kind of being, which in the present investigation we have called presence at hand. Consciousness of my Dasein means, for Kant, a consciousness of my being present at hand in the sense of Descartes. When Kant uses the term Dasein, he has in mind the being present at hand of consciousness just as much as the being present at hand of things. The proof for the Dasein of things outside of me is supported by the fact that both change and performance belong with equal primordiality to the essence of time. My own being present at hand, that is, the being present at hand of a multiplicity of representations which has been given in the inner sense, is a process of change which is present at hand to have a determinate temporal character. Is seid best im Zeit. I'm assuming that's pronounced Zeit. I kind of want to say Thiet, and sometimes I say Thiet. But when I hear German, Zeit sounds more German, especially because I'm pretty sure I'm saying Zeit in the beginning of that word. Seid best im Zeit would thus make sense to me. But anyway, however, presupposes something present at hand, which is permanent. But this cannot be in us, for only through what is thus permanent can my Dasein in time be determined. Thus, if changes which are present at hand have been posited empirically in me, it is necessary that along with these something permanent, which is present at hand, should be posited empirically outside of me. What is thus permanent is the condition which makes it possible for the changes in me to be present at hand. The experience of the being in time, of representation, posits something changing in me and something permanent outside of me, and it posits both with equal primordiality. Bear with me a second, I just want to know how much longer this is. Okay. All right. Whoops. Okay, where are we at? With equal. Okay, here we go. We'll see where I'm at by the end of the page, by about 240, 245. Here, I'm going to hit a break in the next, 10-ish minutes. Of course, this proof is not a casual inference and is therefore not encumbered with the disadvantage of which that would imply. Kant gives, as it were, an ontological proof in terms of the idea of temporal entity. It seems at first as if Kant has given up the Cartesian approach of positing a subject one can come across in isolation, but only in semblance, that Kant demands any proof at all for the Dasein of things outside of me, shows already that he takes the subject, the in me, as the starting point for this problematic. Moreover, his proof itself is then carried through by starting with the empirically given changes in me, for only in me is time experienced, and time carries the burden of the proof. Hey, what's up, Violence? You made it. And my God, you've wow, you have not been here. How are you? You're not. Hold on a second. Let's right a wrong in the universe. Whoops. Stop. There. Come on. Come in. Oh my God. There we go. All right. Boom. You're a wrench. All right. Okay, for semblance, course of proof. Okay, furthermore, Kant emphasizes that problematic kind of idealism, which merely alleges our inability to prove by immediate experience that there is a Dasein outside of our own, is reasonable in accords with the sound kind of philosophical thinking, namely, to permit no decisive judgment until an adequate proof has been found. Now, that's very interesting. Now we're talking about the relationship of Dasein, whether it's inside of you, outside of you, and when you see something outside of you that doesn't make sense in your world, that you have this resolve of judgment, right? You almost withhold judgment because you need more information, right? It's about not having that knee-jerk reaction to the unknown interference into your field of awareness and understanding. Right? And all of this gets down to, especially if we want to talk about equiprimordial things, it's stuff you're going to feel on a nervous system level, right? Your world gets threatened, your nervous system goes for it, you know? All right. But even if the ontical priority of the isolated subject and inner experience should be given up, Descartes' position would still be retained ontologically. What Kant proves, if we may suppose that his proof is correct and correctly based, is that entities which are changing and entities which are permanent are necessary present at hand together. But when two things which are present at hand are thus put on the same level, This does not as yet mean that subject and object are present at hand together. And even if this were proved, what is ontologically decisive would still be covered up, namely the basic state of the subject Dasein as being in the world. The being present at hand together of the physical and the physical is completely different ontically and ontologically from the phenomenon of being in the world. All right. So I'm going to consider that the bottom of the page, basically. I'm going to keep that highlighted right there. And then, if I jump back over here, we are going to listen to some more Muzak while I take a shorty. Here we've been listening to the Athma album by Persephone, which is pretty spiritually conscious music. All right, for all the screaming. Okay, cool. Yep. Okay, yeah. That's Persephone. They're very ascended, if you will. Spirals Within Us, I think that one's called, right? So, anywho, welcome back, everybody. Let's jump into it. Leaving off over here, we were on page 248 at the bottom, or was it 204 at the bottom? I can't remember. There's different numbers and whatever. Kant presupposes both the distinction between the in me and the outside of me, and also the connection between these. Factically, he is correct in doing so, but he is incorrect from the standpoint of the tendency of his proof. It has not been demonstrated that the sort of thing which gets established about the being present at hand together, or the changing and the permanent when one takes time as one's clue, will also apply to the connection between the in me and the outside of me. But if one were to see the whole distinction between the inside and the outside, and the whole connection between them with Kant's proof presupposes, and if one were to have an ontological connection of what has been presupposed in this presupposition, then the possibility of holding that a proof of the Dasein of things outside of me is a necessary one, which is yet to be given, noch osthahind, would collapse. Let me read that again. Let me read that again, because that sounded interesting. Okay. So, then the possibility of holding that a proof of the Dasein of things outside of me is a necessary one, which has yet to be given, would collapse. Okay, that is getting into a very basic principle of the strength of your world versus another person's world. Is what this person is bringing into your world, is it necessary for your ontological relationship with life? Okay? Let me jump back a little bit further. Such long sentences. So, but if one were to see the whole distinction between the inside and the outside, and the whole connection between them with Kant's proof of supposes, and if one were to have an ontological conception of what has been presupposed in this presupposition, then the possibility, which is just saying, like, can we get to the very flavoring content of the point that you're making, right? Of the thing that establishes the world that you're talking about. And Kant's proof presupposes, and if one were to have an ontological conception of what has been presupposed in the presupposition, then the possibility of holding that a proof of the Dasein of things outside of me is a necessary one, which has yet to be given, would collapse. And that is how you destroy a lie, too. That's also what happens when the lie is exposed and knocked down by the dense, raw reality of reality. The scandal of philosophy is not that this proof has yet to be given, but that such proofs are expected and attempted again and again. Such expectations, aims, and demands arise from an ontological, inadequate way of starting with something of such a character that independently of it and outside of it, a world is to be proved as present at hand. It is not that the proofs are inadequate, but that the kind of being of the entities which does the proving and makes requests for proofs has not been made definite enough. This is why a demonstration that two things which are present at hand are necessarily present at hand together can give rise to the illusion that something has been proved, or even can be proved, about Dasein as being in the world. If Dasein is understood correctly, it defies such proofs, because in its being it already is what subsequent proofs deem necessary to demonstrate for it. If one were to conclude that since the being present at hand of things outside of us is impossible to prove, It must therefore be taken merely on faith. One would still fail to surmount yes, violence. Distinction between me and not me, time is illusion. Yes. This inappropriate way of approaching the problem is still endorsed when one restricts oneself to a faith in the reality of the external world. So even if such a faith is explicitly acknowledged as such, although one is not offering a stringent proof, one is still in principle demanding a proof and trying to satisfy that demand. So this is about that cognitive dissonance that can kind of start to percolate, or at the very least the foundational issue that cognitive dissonance is about begins to percolate, which is something in the world at large doesn't make sense to me, and I am trying to accept the world at large over my own world. Right? That's what happens with these people that go out and they don't care about making a distinction between themselves and the world. It's just they're a part of the world. Right? And that gets into all of the spiritual teachers talking about worldliness as such. Right? And under the assumption that we're talking about the same definition of worldly, right? Which hopefully is being interpreted correctly, which is in the philosophical sense of the Wereld, of the perception of reality. Typically is, because, the spirituality is very philosophical. You're not supposed to take all that stuff literally, until you get into some really hardcore disciplines that take the mystery to the next level. But we're talking about surface level mystery for the profane rabble masses, whether they ever get it or not. Okay. If one were to conclude that since the being present at hand of things outside of us is impossible to prove, it must therefore be taken merely on faith, one would still fail to surmount this perseverance. Oh, hold on. Did I read that already? I think I did. A principle demanding proof and trying to satisfy... I'm sorry. I'm down here. All right. Even if one should invoke the doctrine that the subject must presuppose, and indeed always does, unconsciously presuppose the presence at hand of the external world, one would still be starting with the construct of an isolated subject. The phenomenon of being in the world is something that one would no more meet in this way than one would by demonstrating that the physical and the psychical are present at hand together. With such a presuppositions, Dasein always comes too late, for insofar as it does this presupposing as an entity, and otherwise this would be impossible. It is, as an entity, already in a world, earlier than any presupposition which Dasein makes, or any of its ways of behaving, is the a priori character of its state of being as one whose kind of being is care. To have faith in the reality of the external world, whether rightly or wrongly, to prove this reality for it, whether adequately or inadequately, to presuppose it, whether explicitly or not, attempts such as these within have not mastered their own basis with full transparency, presuppose a subject which is proximally worldless or unsure of its world, and which must at bottom first assure itself of a world. Thus, from the very beginning, being in a world is disposed to take things in some way, off hasen, to suppose, to be certain, to have faith, a way of behaving which itself is always a found mode of being in the world. The problem of reality in the sense of the question whether an external world is present at hand and whether such a world can be proved turns out to be an impossible one. Not because its consequences lead to inextricable impasses, but because the very entity which serves as its theme is one which, as it were, repudiates any such formulation of the question. Our task is not to prove that an external world is present at hand or to show how it is present at hand, but to point out why Dasein, as being in the world, has the tendency to bury the external world in nullity, epistemologically, before going on to prove it. Oh, that's very interesting, and there's an annotation there. It's just in German, so I can't really, I'm not going to be able to make sense of that. Okay. External world, prove it. Okay, so, our task is not to prove the external world is present at hand or to show that it's present, but to point out why the sign is being in the world is the tendency to bury the external world in nullity. Okay? So that's interesting. So they're asking the question of when it comes to the actual Dasein itself, the external world, right? The existential world goes away, right? I guess that's kind of the idea. Like, here I am, like, in my room, and the rest of the world, other than the cold that seeps in and thus is present at hand, the outside world doesn't really exist or matter because of the security of this inside world that I have, in which the home is a manifested reflection of my inside world. And from that, I can relax, right? I mean, like, if anything, Dasein creates that nullity for the sake of fucking anxiety, right? And the reason why the anxiety is there is because we're overthinking 20 million things that ain't got nothing to do with us in our concepts of projecting the future, right? Animals don't live like that. Animals, I don't know if how aware, like, I think, like, if an animal's, like, under attack or something, it just becomes a shocking thing in their existence to go from, like, oh my god, something's just coming right after me. What? I can't believe that this is happening again. It's been, like, a month since the last time this happened to my herd of caribou. Does that make any sense? Right? Anyway, let's keep going. The reason for this lies in Dasein's falling in the way in which the primary understanding of being has been diverted to being as presence at hand, a diversion which is motivated by that falling itself. If one formulates the question critically, with such an ontological orientation, then what one finds present at hand as proximally and solely certain is something merely inner, after the primordial phenomenon of being in the world has been shattered. The isolated subject is all that remains, and this becomes the basis on which it gets joined together with a world. So, yeah, a good example of this kind of thing is I've got the things I'm working out for my personal well-being in my home life, in my personal private life. This has a reflection on my external world, and it dictates how often I get out to put stuff out on YouTube. This also I have to compensate for some of the things that I deal with and want to do with my life to be happy, as well as to work on myself. Can also perhaps, there's just not enough hours in a day, so I have a rough morning because I kind of pushed it last night to get a thing or two done because I didn't want to put it off any further after I decompressed from getting home from work or whatever, right? And then that can affect my job performance, and then things come into question that push right up on my Dasein, right? Their world, the world where the only thing that matters is your time and effort devoted to the company when the company has asked for you to come in as per the agreements, and then the pressure of the criticism of my human failings to be perfect over things that are not that hard for other people and are only hard for me because I got things I got to take care of in my self regardless of any gig. And it's the reason why I am getting better than you, whether my success at this job reflects it or not. But I can't explain any of that in any kind of rational way. So I may lose my temper because now you're threatening my world, because now it throws into question, my value to the company for the time that I sacrifice for them, versus what I'm going through at home, which is private and personal and nobody's fucking business, and it's not fair to you that I'm late and that it causes a problem. But nobody's perfect. No offense to my boss, but he's no one to talk. He calls out whole days, and I got to get reprimanded for 15 minutes late. And the only difference is that he tells a particular true story, and everybody says, okay, great, right? They accept his sacrifice for himself. I don't believe they would accept my sacrifice for myself because I can't make it sound real to them, right? My world isn't real to them. My shamanic bullshit that I go through, it's real to me first and foremost, and it may be real to you, which is why you're here. And it may be real to my friends, which is why they bother to call me to hang out. For everyone else, it's childish fantasies get to work. And I find that disposition repugnant. Completely repugnant, because everybody deserves a right to a very full and rich human experience dealing with pains, and we can deal with the imperfections of our poignancy in places that are not life or death. It's just a basic job. It's not an important job like something bad's going to happen, right? Nothing bad's going to happen like that, unless, of course, there's a truck that shows up that wasn't expected to show up, right? Because I will make those efforts for their world on things where there's an expectation. Like, the truck's going to be here at 8 a.m. sharp. And it's just like, all right. And then I'm just like, okay, this is a day where I actually have to sacrifice my personal. I can do it this day because it was fair, ahead of time, whatever. Just get up a little bit earlier. Maybe I'm on 5 hours of sleep, but the point is that I do it. And I get there on time for them in that way, right? That's never, but it's never really like a company just will take advantage of anybody who does that. They will push the moral authority, right? I suppose that's fair in the grand scheme of the universe. Basically, I'm talking to you about aspects in which you're dealing with the world, and the reason why the world can have that constriction on your world, it's a very Saturnian principle, right? You're feeling kind of like the Hierophant. Are you in a line or out of a line with the high values of the society, the high way things are or are done in the world at large. That's the Hierophant card. That's the 5. Okay, that was a good tear. Let's jump back into this. Okay. I think, yeah, so in this investigation, we cannot discuss at length the many attempts to solve the problem of reality, which have been developed in various kinds of realism and idealism, and in position which mediate between them. Certainly a grain of genuine inquiry is to be found in each of these, but certain as this is, it would be just as perverse if one should want to achieve a tenable solution of the problem by reckoning up how much has been correct in each case. What is needed, rather, is the basic insight that while the different epistemological directions which have been pursued have not gone so very far off epistemologically, their neglect of any existential analytic of Dasein has kept them from obtaining any basis for a well-secured phenomenal problematic, nor is such a basis to be obtained by subsequently making phenomenological corrections on the concepts of subject and consciousness. Such a procedure would give no guarantee that the inappropriate formulation of the question would not continue to stand. Along with Dasein as being in the world, entities within the world have in each case already been disclosed. This existential ontological assertion seems to accord with the thesis of realism, that the external world is really present at hand insofar as this existential assertion does not deny that entities within the world are present at hand. It agrees doxographically, as it were, with the thesis of realism in its results, but it differs in principle from every kind of realism, for realism holds that the reality of the world not only needs to be proved, but also is capable of proof. In the existential assertion, both of these positions are directly negated, but what distinguishes this assertion from the realism altogether is the fact that in realism there is a lack of ontological understanding. Indeed, realism tries to explain reality ontically by the real connections of interaction between things that are real. As compared with realism, idealism, no matter how contrary and untenable it may be in its results, has an advantage in principle, provided that it does not misunderstand itself as psychological idealism. If idealism emphasizes that being and reality are only in the consciousness, this expresses an understanding of the fact that being cannot be explained through entities. But as long as idealism fails to clarify what this very understanding of being means ontologically, or how this understanding is possible, or that it belongs to Dasein's state of being, the interpretation of reality which idealism constructs is an empty one. Yet the fact that being cannot be explained through entities and that reality is possible only in the understanding of being does not absolve us from inquiring into the being of consciousness, of the res cogitans itself. If the idealist thesis is to be followed consistently, the ontological analysis of consciousness itself is prescribed as an inevitable prior task only because being is in the consciousness. That is to say, only because it is the understandable in Dasein. Can Dasein also understand and conceptualize such a characteristic of being as independence, the in itself, and reality in general? Only because of this are independent entities as encountered within the world accessible to circumspection. If what the term idealism says amounts to the understanding that being can never be explained by entities, but is already that which is transcendental. For every entity, then, idealism affords the only correct possibility for a philosophical problematic. If so, Aristotle was no less an idealist than Kant. But if idealism signifies tracing back every entity to a subject of consciousness whose sole distinguishing features are that it remains indefinite in its being and is best characterized negatively as unthing-like, then this idealism is no less naive in its method than the most grossly militant realism. Okay, let's see. Excellent. All right. It is still possible that one may give the problematic of reality priority over any orientation in terms of standpoints by maintaining the thesis that every subject is what it is only for an object, and vice versa. But in this formal approach, the terms thus correlated, like the correlation itself, remain ontologically indefinite. At the bottom, however, the whole correlation necessarily gets thought of as somehow being, and must therefore be thought of with regard to some definite idea of being. Of course, if the existential ontological basis has been made secure beforehand by exhibiting being in the world, then this correlation is one that we can know later as a formalized relation, ontologically indifferentiated. Can I up the volume? Yeah. Yeah, I can up it a little bit. Let's see. All right. How's that? I don't want to bring it up too much because typically when I do that, it goes overboard. All right. Our discussion of the unexpressed presuppositions of attempts to solve the problem of reality in ways which are just epistemological shows that the problem must be taken back as an ontological one into the existential analytic of Dasein. So here Heidegger is being so bold as to transcend the epistemology of the matter, right? So, like, I'm sitting here thinking that effectively the ontology of the thing, although is major to be talked about, that this is kind of epistemological. But now we're talking about ontology and not epistemology, right? Which is something else. Okay, so we're going to take, I guess another break. This is actually not the end of the chapter. That was the end of part A of this chapter. Let me take a look and see how long this is going to go. And then there's C. All right, B and C. Okay, we're going to take a break, and then we're going to read sections B and C. And then we're going to check our time once we get to the end of chapter 43 over here. So we're going to jump back in and rock and roll with some more of Persephone. Let's see what we got here. This is 7-2, right? All right, so this bad boy is about 3 minutes, I think. Cosmic Walkers. There we go. That one jumps like right into the next track, hardcore, and then it goes on. So that's like a 5-minute song. So I didn't want to jam 5 and 3 minutes together. So I was just I'm just gonna go for it. All right. So yeah, being as an ontological problem. If the term reality is meant to stand for the being of entities present at hand within the world, and nothing else is understood thereby, then when it comes to analyzing this mode of being, this signifies that entities within the world are ontologically conceivable only if the phenomenon of within-the-worldness has been clarified. But within-the-worldness is based upon the phenomenon of the world, which, for its part, as an essential item in the structure of Dasein in the world, belongs to the basic constitution of Dasein. Being in the world, in turn, is bound up ontologically in the structural totality of Dasein's being, and we have characterized care as such a totality. But in this way, we have marked out the foundations and horizons which must be clarified if an analysis of reality is to be possible. Only in the connection, moreover, does the character of the in itself become ontologically intelligible. By taking our orientation from this context of problems, we have, in our earlier analysis, interpreted the being of entities within the world. To be sure, the reality of the real can be characterized phenomenologically within certain limits without any explicit existential ontological basis. This is what Dilthey has attempted in the article mentioned above. He holds that the real gets experienced in impulse and will, and that reality is resistance, or more exactly, the character of resisting. All the annotations thus far today have not really needed to be read. There hasn't been that many of them. I think as we're getting further into the book, all the annotations have covered most of the new terminologies that Heidegger created, which the annotations were necessary for, in what is already the tricky situation of redefining certain words in order to have a stronger command of your language, in order to have better control of your sense of self, your authority, your ability. It's a very Kenaz-oriented thing in the runic. He then works out the phenomenon of resistance analytically. This is the positive contribution of his article and provides the best concrete substantiation for his idea of a psychology which both describes and dissects, but he is kept from working out the analysis of this phenomenon correctly by the epistemological problematic of reality. The principle of phenomenality does not enable him to come to an ontological interpretation of the being of consciousness. Within the same consciousness, he writes, the will and its inhibitions emerge. What kind of being belongs to this emerging? What is the meaning of the being of the within? What relationship of being does consciousness bear to the real itself? All this must be determined ontologically. That this has not been done depends ultimately on the fact that Dilthey has left life standing in such a manner that it is ontologically undifferentiated. And of course, life is something which one cannot go back behind. But to interpret Dasein ontologically does not signify that we must go back ontically to some other entity. The fact that Dilthey has been refuted epistemologically cannot prevent us from making fruitful use of what is positive in his analysis. In other words, he's looking at a guy that may have been ultimately proved wrong on certain points, but it's just wait, he was right about X, Y, and Z. And we can apply that to my superior understanding, etc., etc. Reality is surreality, which is real. Sorry, I had to get one of those really bad jokes in there to get my channel shut down and all that, But anyway, positive analysis of very things has not been understood in such refutations. Thus, Scheller has recently taken up Dilthey's interpretation of reality. He stands for a voluntative theory of Dasein. Here, Dasein is understood in the Kantian sense as being present at hand. The being of objects is given immediately, only in the way it is related to drive and will. Scheller not only emphasizes, as does Dilthey, that reality is never primarily given in thinking and apprehending. He also points out particularly that cognition, erkennen, itself is not judgment, and that knowing, wissen, is a relationship of being. I like how wissen, which means knowing, sounds like listen. It's like, listen! If you want to know something, you're going to listen. Wissen! Wissen, listen. I like that. What we have already said about the ontological indefiniteness of Dilthey's foundations holds in principle for this theory too, nor can the fundamental ontological analysis of life be slipped in afterwards as a substructure. Such a fundamental Such a fundamental analysis provides the supporting conditions for the analysis of reality, for the entire explication of the character of resisting and its phenomenal presuppositions. Resistance is encountered in a not coming through and is encountered as a hindrance to willing to come through. With such willing, however, something must already have been disclosed, which one's drive and one's will are out for. But what they are out for is ontically indefinite, and this indefiniteness must not be overlooked ontologically or taken as if it were nothing. When being out for something comes up against resistance and can do nothing but come up against it, it is itself already alongside a totality of involvements. But the fact that this totality has been discovered is grounded in the disclosedness of the referential totality of significance, the experiencing of resistance, that is, the discovery of what is resistance to one's endeavors, is possible ontologically only by reason of the disclosedness of the world. The character of resisting is one that belongs to entities with the world. Factically, experiences of resistance determine only the extent and the direction in which entities encountered within the world are discovered. The summation of such experiences does not introduce the disclosure of the world for the first time, but presupposes it. The against and the counter to, as ontological possibilities, are supported by disclosed beings in the world, nor is resistance experienced in a drive or will which emerges in its own right. These both turn out to be modifications of care. Only entities with the kind of being can come up against something resistance as something within the world. So if reality gets defined as the character of resisting, we must notice two things. First, that this is only one character of reality among others. Second, that the character of resisting presupposes necessarily a world which has already been disclosed. So in short, you're kind of talking about kind of like when you have your own personal apocalypse and you can see that in one respect of things, oh my God, the world is the demiurge closing down on me. And then on the other side of things, like, my God, I'm a living God. Wow, I'm so powerful, I can do it all. Right? It's just, it's all that, right? It's living, it's the functioning spectrum that are all truisms of the world. As powerful as I have found myself, I definitely have got, oh my God, the demiurge, just a little bit of, the demiurge! Not that it really bothers me, it's just one of those, it's just like, obstacle number 506,391. Great. Right? Like, that's just kind of the attitude I try to take with it, only because I'm, it's there, it's in my way, and I'm going to have a positive attitude about it till I overcome it. And then I'm going to have a positive attitude about overcoming it, which will be easy because it will have been overcome. What's that? Mountains, mushrooms, and rivers? Is that the idea? Anyway, resistance characterizes the external world in the sense of entities within the world, but never in the sense of the world itself. Consciousness of reality is itself a way of being in the world. Every problematic of the external world comes back necessarily to this basic existential phenomenon. So yeah. So that's the kind of the thing, right? It's just like, on the one hand, I could do whatever I want. But on the other hand, it feels funny. It feels like you can't do what you want when there are other things around you that disallow it or dismiss it or kind of try to make you not, to pull their influence on you as a part of your world, right? You know, when for whatever various reason, your peers, your friends, your family, they all tell you no, right? Like, don't do that. Don't be that. Meaning, don't be in a state of doing those kinds of things. Don't do the things you like to do that build the world you want to build, right? They tell you that because you're doing it in front of them and they're helpless to help you. They want you to do something that they can help you with, but they're fairly helpless people, so they want you to do something that isn't that impressive so they can show you support and they can smile, you know, and you have the gift of them not being on your case, right? Oh, you're not on my case. I have enough approval for my existence to be bearable in your presence. That's great, right? As opposed to me doing what I want to do, right? You know? And that goes the same for chat rooms, right? Chat rooms. There's a reason why I have the kinds of protocols that I have with trolls. And there's a reason why I don't use those protocols in other chat rooms unless I've seen the proper cues from how that conversation that troll is engaging in and being engaged in is going, and where the attitudes are at of people that are authorities of those said chat rooms versus what I do, you know, here, right? And then I work certain tactics because it goes back to my principles that I've been living by for so long that it's just is what it is. That's just switching the wolves. I've talked about the switching the wolves method of dealing with hate and shame, which are the essences that you feel of hati and skol. Right? And it always seems like I'm getting these bad boys mixed up. Hati swallows the sun, skol swallows the moon. It's been my understanding. Hate, right? The haters out there. What's the quality of the target of a hater? Somebody who is radiant, somebody who's happy, someone who shines, someone who inspires, who leads, who is an example, right? And then who's Skull? Skull is the treacherous one, right? This is the shamer, right? The one that this is the one that wants to make you doubt yourself. You know, one wants to directly stop you, right? One wants to very proactively stop you. The other one is setting up plots around you that are there to collapse your world, to put a mask. It puts a mask on you, a false persona of who you are for people to judge you by, to change their perception of you into a place where you fall out of trust and you fall out of favor. You fall out of likeness. Right? This is what you do. right? You make it seem like they were some sort of monster, some sort of villain. This is Skoll. Hati and Skoll have very similar qualities to Gjallar and Fjallar, the dwarves, the evil dwarves, the dark elves, who murdered the Kvasir to create the meat of poetry, right? The shouter and the whisperer, right? The shouter being kind of like Hati, the one who is going to project it out, right? It's almost very much, it's like Aries and Scorpio, right? It's like Aries' sense of revenge versus Scorpio's sense of revenge. That's actually fairly appropriate allegories for these creatures. Anyway, resistance characterizes the external world in the sense of entities within the world, but never in the sense of the world itself. Conscious reality is itself a way of being in the world. Every problematic of the external world comes back necessarily to this basic existential phenomenon. If the cognito sum is to serve as the point of departure for the existential analytic of Dasein, then it needs to be turned around, and furthermore, its content needs new ontologico-phenomenal confirmation. The sum is then asserted first, and indeed, in the sense that I am in a world, as such an entity, I am in the possibility of being towards various ways of comporting myself, namely, cogitationes, as ways of being alongside entities within the world. Descartes, on the contrary, says the cogitationes are present at hand, and that in these, an ego is present at hand too, as a worldless res cogitans, or cogitans. Your Mars is in Leo. Yes, so is mine. C. Reality and care. Reality as an ontological term is one which we have related to entities within the world. If it serves to designate this kind of being in general, then readiness to hand and presence at hand function as modes of reality. If, however, one lets this world have its traditional signification, then it stands for being in the sense of the pure presence at hand of things. But not all presence at hand is the presence at hand of things. The nature by which we are surrounded is, of course, an entity within the world. But this kind of being which it shows belongs neither to the ready to hand nor to what is present at hand as things of nature. No matter how this being of nature may be interpreted, all the modes of being of entities within the world are founded ontologically upon the worldhood of the world, and accordingly upon the phenomenon of being in the world. From this there arises the insight that among the modes of being of entities within the world, reality has no priority, and that reality is a kind of being which cannot even characterize anything like the world or Dasein in a way which is ontologically appropriate. What you're looking at here, it feels to me, it's kind of like that the world and worldhood, right? Like, worldhood and world, right? One's more about literal, like, space and time, like, being out there among people, you know, like in the physical, temporal. And then the worldhood is kind of like in your head. The reality of that world is its worldhood. And do you have a grasp of that? The reason why my magic is not impeded in the real world is because I know how to step in my own Dasein alongside others. Where I'm almost in my own mental latent space while I'm out amongst the people and everything's completely normal because it's almost like I'm in a fantasy world, and then when you show up, it's like a magic mirror into the mundane reality, and then I open up for a second to be like, ah, yes, those flowers are $9.95. Anyway, so I was on the Rainbow Bridge to Asgard in my head. This is life. This is part of my life, right? And when you carry this with you, and their inceptions of evil that they've imprinted in people in the world to be used against you to perpetuate the culture that they wish, and to say that your culture is a terrible thing that I can't tolerate the presence of, which is part and parcel of deeper conversations about freedom in the politics, the socio-politics of our nation. But this is the very real stuff that you can't vote for because it's about how we treat each other, which then informs all sorts of other manners of how policy manifests and unfolds, and why we have a different relationship now with laws and statutes than we did just 4 years ago. Okay. In the order of the ways in which things are connected in their ontological foundation, and in the order of any possible categorical and existential demonstration, reality is referred back to the phenomenon of care. But the fact that reality is ontologically grounded is the being of Dasein. Does not signify that only when Dasein exists and as long as Dasein exists can the real be as that which in itself it is. Of course, only as long as Dasein is, that is only as long as understanding of being is ontically possible. Is there being? Hold on. All right, this one we're going to read. Gibt es sein, in his letter Über den Humanismus, Klostermann, Frankfurt, AM, reprinted from Platon's Lehre von der Wahrheit, Frank, A.G. Burr, 1947. Heidegger insists that the expression of es gibt is here used deliberately and should be taken literally as it gives. He writes for the it, which here gives, is being itself. So your being in the world has a giving nature, right? This gives, however, designates the essence of being which gives and which confers its truth. He adds that the es gibt is used to avoid writing that being is, for the verb is appropriate to entities, but not to being itself. Interesting. So the isness of it doesn't relate to being itself, but the entities that make up the being itself. Which, I guess that makes sense because when we're talking in context of the world is filled with all sorts of individual little things that change, right? All I have to do is take this penny, go like that, and now the penny is still here, but it's not present at hand anymore. It's far out of the reach of my hands. It becomes a little bit more existential than it was before, and thus changes the isness of being. Because the isness of the entity has changed. There's a lot to say about the isness of being. But anyway. So, hold on, that was the annotation. Where was, okay. Shoot. Being not entities, the sign is, wait, how far back am I going here? I'm sorry, phenomenon of care, which itself it is, the sign is. Shoot. I'm sorry, folks, I've lost my place. Reality, not the real, das sign, only in a positive manner. I feel like I've gone ahead of it now. I'm so sorry, I've lost my spot. Alright, I feel like I'm way up here, and then I had this. Oh, there it is. When Dasein does not exist, independence is not either, nor is the in itself. In such a case, this sort of thing can be neither understood nor not understood. In such a case, even entities within the world can neither be discovered nor lie hidden. In such a case, it cannot be said that the entities are, nor can it be said that they are not. But now, as long as there is an understanding of being and therefore an understanding of presence at hand, it can indeed be said that in this case entities will still continue to be. This kind of gets into Schrodinger's cat, which I don't like talking about Schrodinger's cat anymore because I've realized that they don't tell you in the short explanation of the quantum point of the experiment that son of a bitch put the cat in a box with a fucking bottle of cyanide. And it's been like, the cat's either dead or alive, depending on whether he knocked over the cyanide in the box. Nobody can observe it, so no one can say. So now both realities exist. But you did all that. You wanted to torture. You tortured a cat for science. That's what you did. You didn't just put a cat in a box, which is cute and normal because cats love boxes, right? So you put a cat in a box, you just close the lid so you can't see him. Makes sense. Like, no, you literally put something in there that could kill the cat to make sure that you're thinking to yourself, the second that box is closed, here's a rational thing that you also assume. Like, dude, like, the second you close that thing, the cyanide capsule either is in there or not. Technically, right? Because it being dead or alive, the whole quantum point, like at the end of the day, you're not making a quantum point anymore. You're making a point about causality, which is very mundane and also important, but it's not metaphysical science, navel-gazing, speculative intelligence. It's not. The way we do it is with the part taken out where the guy was a fucking monster who risked the life of a cat to, he could have done anything else, but he had to risk the life of a cat because he needed to put something in the box that he had no control over, right? So, it's amazing to think about where we were as a society back then, and what we thought of animal sacrifice, right? We tolerated animal sacrifice all through the 20th century through animal testing. So anyway, okay. As we have noted, being, not entities, is dependent upon the understanding of being, that is to say, reality, not the real, is dependent upon care. By this dependency, our further analytic of Dasein is held secure in the face of an uncritical interpretation which nevertheless keeps urging itself upon us, an interpretation in which the idea of reality is taken as the clue to Dasein. Only if we take our orientation from existentiality as interpreted as an ontological positive manner can we have any guarantee that in the factical course of the analysis of consciousness or of life, some sense of reality does not get made basic, even if it is one which has not been further differentiated. So this thing about care coming into play makes me think of dark care. If you've never heard Mark Passio's lecture on dark care, it's very predominantly important, especially in context to our treatment of humanity in 2020 and 2021. I mean, I can certainly think that we are certainly registering the world in a very foremost way in the sense of, quote, care, right? The sense of you know, is the amount of love, attention, and treatment of various entities that are in my world or in my awareness, are they being treated according to the way they ought to be treated? What are my standards of the way something ought to be treated? Right? And that's not just in the sense of, is it being abused, exploited, or fashioned, whatever. It's just like, you know, it's like these are glasses, right? Okay, but if I put it here, that has nothing to do with its utility. It just falls right off. You see, right? So that's a mistreatment. It is not showing proper care for the item. It's not using the tool properly, right? Granted, if you have an imagination, you can make proper of it, and it will be self-evident when you do. Something will happen where it just fits to form and use, and you can exude the confidence that this is the right way for you. And it's important to exude that confidence because you need that funky way that you're doing things, that you are being, has to stand up to the scrutiny of Dasein. Okay, so dependent on care, all right. By this dependency, our further analysis of Dasein is held secure in the face of an uncritical interpretation, which nevertheless keeps urging itself upon us as an interpretation in which the idea of reality is taken as the clue to Dasein. Did I read all of this? No. I'm just going to keep reading this one again because I think we should go over it again. Dasein is secure in the face of interpretation, keeps us urging itself upon us, interpretation in which the idea of reality is taken as a clue to Dasein. Only if we take our orientation from existentiality as interpreted in an ontological positive manner can we have any guarantee that in the factical course of the analysis of consciousness or of life, some sense of reality does not get made basic, even if it is one which has not been further differentiated. Entities with Dasein's kind of being cannot be conceived in terms of reality and substantiality. We have expressed this by the thesis that the substance of man is existence. Yet, if we have interpreted existentiality as care and distinguished this from reality, this does not signify that our existential analytic is at an end. We have merely allowed the intricate problems of the question of being and its possible modes, and the question of the meaning of such modifications to emerge more sharply only if the understanding of being is, do entities as entities become accessible. Only if entities are of Dasein's kind of being is the understanding of being possible as an entity. The understanding of being correct. The impasse where I had a little scuff with my boss is because you wouldn't understand, man. It's Joker. It's the end of Joker where he's laughing at the reflection of his life at the end of the movie, sitting in the thing, and she's just like, "Well, what's so funny?" He's just like, "You wouldn't get it, right? You wouldn't get it. You wouldn't get it, right? The big joke of yourself, or the big joke of how wrong the world is despite you and your imperfections, right? Like just like that reflection by the end of that movie, Joker has this cathartic moment about his world. His world is Gotham City, right? It's like there's nothing more existential to this version of the Joker than Gotham as an entity, Gotham as its own Dasein. All right, now, before I figure out, let's see, how long is 44? How long do I want to be with you guys today? 44 is pretty damn long. Ooh, very long. Wicked long. Oh, we're definitely not doing this. I don't even want to do part of this. This should be made into its own. Wow, is this all 44? Get the hell out of here. Did I skip it? Look how long this chat. Dude, this is definitely like this chat. This itself might be 2 fucking streams to get through. Is that literally all of it? Yeah, because the 44 ends Division 1. Wow. Then it goes into Division 2. All right, so the next 2 live streams. Yeah, this keeps going because we go into the 60s here. Yeah. So the next 2 live streams, most likely, are going to go into Chapter 44. I gotta go find my place. I'll find it later before I close down the app, because the app will remember what page I'm on most of the time. I think I'm in the right spot. I am. I'm in the right spot. Excellent. Okay. Woo! So that's the kind of hardcore work that I do here. Right? Thanks for tuning in. I know it's a sloppy mess. I'm this unprofessional schmuck who is not at 100% shape yet, but I choose to take my shirt off like I'm all that anyway. I am a feral creature. I am a happy man. I'm not trying to succeed in the synthetic universe. Well, I mean, I am. I'm trying to be successful, but the synthetic universe has to be a tool, right? Because eventually it becomes about not me on the internet, but what I put on the internet. Eventually it'll turn into it's about my product and not about me, right? Then me can be somewhere else, not making money, while my product makes money for me. That's kind of the ticket. You look at YouTubers out there, and I notice that. It's like they're not the winner. Their product is the winner. You know? And that goes for guys that you may think are assholes that you hate. Andrew Tate. Love him or hate him. He's successful in his own right. He's not just successful because a bunch of people found him on Facebook. This is also, I want to make a point, this is a distinct flaw, whether you love or hate Donald Trump. Donald Trump, the second half of his life was TV. The first half of his life was New York real estate. He started in the fucking 70s or whatever, 60s, 70s. And he did that for a long-ass time. He wasn't like a TV guy. He wasn't like an on-TV guy in the 90s. He was involved with television, right? Like these are all important distinctions. You're not gonna beat a guy by taking a comfortable assumption that I can demonstrate to you is a lie, and whether you have that reality dawn upon you or not, that it is a lie, that he's only and merely and predominantly a personality on TV that you remember from the 2000s as such. Right? Like, everybody's got this perception that he was handed his wealth. I'm not saying he wasn't just handed his wealth or what. I'm not saying that there wasn't some sort of chicanery, but nobody's got it right. You know, they don't like how there's nothing to his story of how he got rich. It's like his dad lent him a lot of money, and then he made a lot of money and paid his dad back. And he was born, you know, from somebody who was like, I don't know, I think with the $1 million, lower upper class? You could say lower upper class, perhaps. Anyway, I'm not making a defense of the man, but I also just I couldn't care less. That's you go ahead and you have fun with whatever you want to say about the Don. All right, I will catch you guys later. Thanks for tuning in.